Yes. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and for joining Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster Ventura County, or VOAD, which is much shorter. My name is Maria Mello, and I'm honored to be the director of VOAD. I'm joined today by Ashley Pope, who I will introduce in more detail in a little bit, but who is the board director for Autism Society of Ventura County. Buenos días, gracias por acompañar a nuestra red, organizaciones voluntarias activas en desastres del condado de Ventura esta mañana. Estoy aquí con Ashley Pope, la directora de la Junta de la Sociedad de Autismo del condado de Ventura. Y voy a comenzar hoy por empezar a cuadrar todo para poder empezar la interpretación de inglés a español y voy a presentar a nuestro intérprete. I'm going to start by getting us all set up for interpretation English to Spanish services, and it's my pleasure to introduce Clara Garzón, who is an interpreter with All Languages Interpreting and Translating Inc., a Ventura-based company. And Clara will make some announcements. Clara hará unos anuncios para todos. Gracias.
Good morning, everyone. Muy buenos días a todos. Bienvenidos a esta sesión. Welcome to this session. I will make the announcement first in English regarding the interpretation function. If those of you who are connected via computer, I ask that you go to your toolbar at the bottom of your screen and you will see either a globe, a little whirl, or three dots. Click on the globe or three dots, and that will take you to interpretation. Once you have clicked interpretation, click again the language of your choice. English if it's English, and Spanish if it's Spanish. Even if you're bilingual, we ask that you please select a language. It is important that you speak at a moderate pace so that the interpreter can translate or interpret rather accordingly. If you are connected to a cell phone, you can also go to the three dots located on the right side of your phone and click interpretation, and finally, the language of your choice. Muy buenos días. Nuevamente, estas instrucciones van a ser dadas en español. Si usted está conectado en una computadora, favor de dirigirse a la parte de abajo de su pantalla y haga clic en el globito mundial o bien en los tres puntitos que digan más o more. Después de hacer clic en los puntitos, lo lleva a interpretación y después seleccione el idioma de preferencia. En este caso sería español y puede usted escuchar toda la sesión en español. Le pedimos permanecer en su canal. La intérprete tiene la habilidad de cambiar de canal de español a inglés o de inglés a español en caso de que quiera usted aportar una pregunta o un comentario. Si está usando un teléfono inteligente, diríjase a los tres puntitos del lado derecho de su teléfono y haga clic en esos puntos. Lo lleva a interpretación y por último a español. Le pedimos que hable a un paso moderado para que la intérprete pueda interpretar de acuerdo a lo que se está diciendo. Muchísimas gracias. En breve se va a activar la función de interpretación. The interpretation function will be activated after this announcement. Thank you very much and have a wonderful session.
And there it is. If you could select your language. I am selecting English right now because I will be speaking in English shortly. Thank you so much, Clara. And it's my pleasure now to talk a little bit about what we're doing today. VOAD, as you all may know, is a collaborative of nearly 50 local nonprofit agencies, faith-based organizations, volunteer groups, public institutions, and private entities dedicated to improving outcomes for Venturans affected by disasters. For over a decade, VOAD has created and facilitated spaces to connect, to train, and to coordinate nonprofit direct services, help disseminate messaging from emergency authorities, and work with service providers to reach vulnerable communities when disasters hit our county. All of this in coordination, of course, with county and local emergency authorities. Today's webinar is the first of 4 VC VOAD spring and summer webinars offered in partnership with local Ventura County-based nonprofits. Together, we will aim to provide social service and disaster service providers with information related to serving the needs of individuals with disabilities and others with access or functional needs before, during, and after disaster. And that is why today it's my pleasure to partner with Autism Society of Ventura County, who I was privileged and just so honored to listen to in our past October Ventura-based government disability conference. And I had a chance to listen to Ashley Pope. So more about Ashley, and thank you for joining us, Ashley. Ashley is a passionate advocate for disability inclusion with lived experience as both a person with a disability and a parent of an autistic son. She serves as the president of Autism Society Ventura County, where she leads efforts to promote equity, access, and community connection for individuals and families navigating life with autism. Professionally, Ashley works as a membership development manager for the Ventura Chamber of Commerce, where she also spearheads event planning and community outreach. With over 9 years in this role, she brings a unique lens to business prosperity, community planning, inclusion, accessibility, and the value of diverse voices in all spaces, from the workspace to public policy. Ashley's a powerful voice in the fight for inclusive society, including inclusive emergency planning, accessible education, and equitable health services. Thank you so much, Ashley, for joining us. Please take it away.
Thank you so much for the introduction and for having me today. I'm really excited to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, we are all set up. Good morning. My name, like you said, my name is Ashley Pope. I'm honored to be here with you all today on behalf of Autism Society Ventura County to present on neurodiversity, affirming practices in disaster preparation. I want to thank each of you for being here. Accessibility and inclusion take intention, and the time that you are taking is so meaningful. I appreciate the initiative that you're taking for your organization and for all of us in Ventura County who might experience disaster a little bit differently. So I will share these slides. Don't worry too much about missing anything. I know this is a lot of information. There we go. This is a little bit of information about today's agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about Autism Society Ventura County. We'll touch on autism and what it is, and a little bit about the statistics that we've all been hearing in the news lately. Then we'll go into what it means to be neurodiversity affirming and why it matters. We'll also touch on experiences of people with autism and disaster and how we can better prepare to serve them. This includes sensory challenges, cognitive and communication challenges, social and medical challenges. Then we'll touch on some cross-disability considerations and what you can do to help. So Autism Society Ventura County, we have been serving Ventura County for 30 years. We offer free programs for people with autism of all ages. We also do a lot of advocacy and community outreach. We have 5 people on our team, 5 staff members, and 10 dedicated board members. A great deal of our work centers around improving services, access, inclusion, and providing that community education. Ideally, in a perfect world, people with autism are engaged and served in every area of our community, and that's our goal. We have a long way to go, and we hope to bring you into that mission today. Our mission for the entire organization is to create connections, empowering everyone in the autism community with the resources needed to live fully. Some of our free programs include art classes for teens, kids, young adults. We also do social groups. We have a book club funded by Ventura County Behavioral Health. We have an advocacy committee, sensory activities for toddlers and parent information. We do teen meetups. We offer free support groups for parents, families, and autistic adults, and community trainings like this one. We tailor community trainings to specific organizations and offer those for free or low cost to whatever organization might need them. And lastly, a point that I really want to drive home is we believe in inclusion so much that our bylaws actually require that 20% of our board members must be autistic. So when we're asking you to outreach to this community and be inclusive, we're doing that while we're also leading by example. What is autism? I'm sure you have all met a person with autism, and there's a famous quote that says, if you know a person with autism, then you know a person with autism, because they are as diverse as you and I, as diverse as your neighborhood, really all across the board. And the way that autism impacts people is so different, but we're all intertwined with autism. Everyone who has autism has familiarity and has a community that binds them. And that's something that we really like to build on as well. So autism is a neurological and developmental disability that affects how people interact with others, communicate, learn, and behave. Autism is a spectrum and needs vary vastly. I'm sure some of the terms that you've heard of are high functioning or low functioning, and we as an organization have really moved away from that. When you hear of someone being high functioning, you think that they can just kind of operate and they don't need anything from the community or they don't have any support needs. And so we've really replaced that title with low support needs, because even though they appear to be high functioning, they probably still have some level of support that they need, at least in some specific situations, such as a disaster. And that's how they were able to get that autism diagnosis. For the low functioning title, first of all, we moved away from that because it's just not very nice. If you think about it, low functioning, that's not a great way to identify a person. But we really look at that as more high support needs. If that person has the supports, then they're able to still live a very full life. And we hope that people will see autism as not from a deficit model, see autism from more of a model of what can we do to be supportive so that this person can live and enjoy everything that we have to offer in Ventura County. We actually just got new data yesterday from the CDC. I had to change the slides yesterday, or actually this morning as it rolled out. It's now 1 in 31 babies born today will be diagnosed with autism. And this is a statistic that comes from the testing of 8-year-olds. So autism is lifelong, and 1 in 31 is a lot of people that have autism. And one thing you'll hear about in the news or just in the way people are talking about this is that autism is growing at this rapid pace. And we would like to really focus more on the fact that it's growing because we have improved our services and because we have improved our diagnostic testing and we're just more aware. So as of 2022, the data was 1 in 36. And as I mentioned, now it's 1 in 31. Autism Society of Ventura County and Autism Society of America both assert that this rise in prevalence does not signal an epidemic like you may hear in the media. It reflects progress in identification and diagnosis. Some other key data points across the CDC report yesterday were that autism affects people across all backgrounds, regardless of race, ethnicity, income, or geography. And access to screening and care, not necessarily demographics, is the critical factor in diagnosis. Autism Society of Ventura County spends very little time and no funds at all on identifying or even discussing causes or cures of autism. We actually don't spend any time on identifying or finding cures, but we do spend a little bit of time discussing it because people are really interested in it. We support programs, policy, and education to build a better Ventura County for those living with autism. So that's really why we exist. And we do chime in on these conversations because sometimes they can be detrimental to the livelihoods of those living with autism in our community. But it's really not where we prefer to spend our time. It's also important to point out that 3 out of 4 people with autism have a co-occurring condition. And yesterday's data painted that 39% of people with autism have a co-occurring intellectual disability. Although autism can be diagnosed at any age, it's described as a developmental disability because symptoms usually generally appear in those first 2 years of life. Diagnosis typically happens around the age of 3. And it's also important that we all understand the diagnosis criteria. There are 3 of them. The first one is around difficulty with communication and interaction with other people. The second is restricted interests and repetitive behaviors. And the third is symptoms that affect the ability to function at school, work, and other areas of life. So without these three criteria, a person cannot qualify for an autism diagnosis. So once again, I just really want to drill in that high functioning autistic person may still need your support in a different kind of way than you're used to offering, especially during a disaster. I love this slide. When we talk about what the spectrum actually looks like, the autism spectrum is so diverse, and it's more like this circle on your right side, where people can struggle and have strengths in various areas rather than being less autistic or more autistic, or low functioning versus high functioning. So we really have to look at a person as a whole person, but also understanding that autism is a huge piece of who they actually are. So what does it mean to be neurodiversity affirming? Neurodiversity recognizes that neurological differences, including autism, but also ADHD, dyslexia, Tourette's, there are a ton of them, are actually natural variations of the human brain. Affirming practices in this context, in your context, ensure that neurodiverse individuals and people with all disabilities can access meaningful support and dignity during an emergency. A key component, especially in planning, is that we should empower self-advocacy and choice wherever possible. And I touched on this before, but we really want to avoid deficit thinking. In a sense, we don't want to say, how can we fix the autism? We want to fix the processes that are broken that don't allow the person with autism to access what they need. As a side note, these principles will definitely benefit everyone that you serve, especially when we talk about disaster response, because there is a trauma element to it. So when we talk about being affirming of each individual as an individual, seeing them as they are and accepting them as they are, that's something that's helpful for everyone. And that includes people with intellectual disabilities, people with anxiety, PTSD, trauma, depression, dementia, the list goes on and on. I do also want to touch on language. This is something we get a lot of questions about. In this presentation and out in the community, you'll notice that Autism Society of Ventura County sometimes uses person-first language, such as person with autism, and sometimes uses what we call identity-first language, which is autistic person. More and more autistic youth and adults are claiming their autism as a key component of who they are, whereas a person with autism indicates that autism is a thing that you have. An autistic person indicates that it's a thing that you are. As a grassroots local organization serving this population, we tend to use the language interchangeably. And I just want to point out that person-first language is still widely accepted across the nation as best practice. So when you're applying for something like a grant, you should always use person-first language. But when you're interfacing with a person who has autism, you can always ask them or their family what they prefer. And I just wanted to note that, because I'm sure if we didn't, we might get some questions about why we use person with autism or why we use autistic person. So then we're going to talk a little bit about data. So on the local scale and outside the local scale, on a national scale, on a world scale, disability data is really lacking. As an autism advocate, this is incredibly frustrating because policymakers at every level need good data to make decisions. And the lack of real data resulting in a lack of support or a lack of funding is one reason why people with disabilities are so underserved. Many grassroots organizations like yourselves maybe don't collect data on disability for fear of HIPAA violations. And it's true that when you do collect this data, you have another level of security that you need to have for that data. And we understand that. But one of the best things that you can do to support us is collect that data and report on that data, because we know that there is so much more out there that we just don't know. We know that we don't know 90% of what's going on in the world of the people that we're trying to help in, and that's rough. So it goes without saying that emergencies impact everyone, but do not impact everyone equally. It's estimated that disabled individuals are 2 to 4 times more likely to die or be seriously injured in disasters than their non-disabled peers. According to a US Census 2024 household pulse surveys, disabilities with individuals are more likely to be displaced in a disaster. And once displaced, 21% of those with disabilities never return home. And that's nearly 4 times the rate of those without disabilities. We also note that people with a disability were more than twice as likely to have received a lot of potential scam offers a month after displacement. So unfortunate. Another disaster that impacted the disability community disproportionately was COVID. And I know that a lot of populations struggle. I know our youth is still struggling. I know we lost so many people in our community through COVID. And unfortunately, we don't have great data on what exactly the impact was for people with developmental disabilities and disabilities in general as a result of COVID. But there was one study called the COVID-19 Mortality Burden and Comorbidity Patterns Among Descendants with and Without Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities in the US. It looked at death certificates. So this is one way that they were able to get around the HIPAA violation, was to actually examine death certificates. And what they found was that although COVID was the leading cause of death for people with developmental disabilities, it was actually number 3 for everyone else in America. So heart disease and cancer were number 1 and 2, and then COVID, whereas for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, COVID was number 1. That paints a very dark picture about the impact that COVID had on our communities, and we need to have greater discussions in really prominent places about why that happened and how and what we can do better next time. These are some statistics from Ventura County. This report was also released fairly recently. It's the Health Services Agency's 2024 Community Emergency Access Assessment Report. And these statistics paint a very similar picture. People with developmental or intellectual disabilities, as well as their caregivers, responding on their behalf, were concerned about potential delays to evacuation. More than 40% said that they were worried that shelters would not be able to accommodate them. And I think that that's really where this group can come into play, because only 25% of all respondents said that they were worried that shelters wouldn't be able to accommodate them. So there's a pretty big gap there. And among respondents identifying as individuals with developmental or intellectual disabilities or answering on behalf of them, multiple people also expressed concern about the availability of appropriate communication and accommodations. So these respondents were half as likely to say that they would go to a shelter during an emergency and were more likely to report feeling very unprepared. I look at these statistics, and although also dark, I feel like this is where we can have such an impact. And this is where the work that we're all doing matters so much. What can we do to make sure that those shelters, number 1, can accommodate? And number 2, what kind of community outreach needs to happen so that people with disabilities understand that we're ready to accommodate them in the case of a disaster? So I look forward to working with you all to make sure that we are prepared. So we're going to discuss a few of the challenges that people with autism face when it comes to disaster and when it comes to access, so that you can understand what needs to change for your specific service, or if there's anything that needs to change. The first one that we're going to discuss is sensory challenges. Sensory overload can be triggered by so many things. I'm sure you've all experienced some level of sensory overload, but for a person with autism, this is something that happens every single day. And we need to be really aware of how things like sirens, alarms, crowds, smells, lights, physical contact, all of these things that aren't too disruptive to a person without autism typically, what kind of impact they can have on a person who has autism or any other neurodiversity need. So when we talk about why we need to avoid sensory overload can lead to meltdowns, shutdowns, refusal to evacuate, or wandering. And we can do so much by providing sensory-friendly spaces, by providing a separate room, a private space, by providing noise-canceling headphones, fidgets, weighted blankets, and sunglasses. There are tools out there, and not only do we need to provide them, but we need to let the community know that we understand why it's important to provide them. I also want to touch on specific clothing and diet needs. So this is something we heard a lot about in the most recent fires in Camarillo. There was a lot of donations going around, food donations, clothing donations, but for a person with autism, the fabric, the way that the fabric feels, the sensory impact of having something that was someone else's or something that even smells like smoke can be a barrier to actually accessing those goods. As far as dietary restrictions, it's not so much that people with autism have specific dietary restrictions over a person without autism, but because of sensory needs, sensory challenges, some people with autism have very, very restricted diet. There's the stereotype of chicken nuggets and macaroni and cheese and French fries being 100% of the diet in a child with autism. That's not necessarily false 100% of the time. Obviously, it's something that we all are working on with our own kids, but this is one that we just have to be really mindful that a family that has a person with autism may need a gift card for groceries over the food being provided at a pantry. And the option of like, well, they're gonna eat it if they get it is not necessarily the case, and usually not the case for a person with autism. When we talk about sensory challenges, I also wanted to give an example because some of you might be thinking, this is a lot. What does it actually mean? What can we do in the case of a disaster to actually accommodate? So we came up with a little bit of an example here. And let's say this is a family of 4 and they have a autistic 17-year-old and they need to evacuate for some reason. Many families would rather stay in their car or be on the street than go to a shelter. And I know we see this across the board, but I can say for myself, I have a 12-year-old with autism, and I can understand this. I could actually see my own family in this situation because the sensory meltdown or the overload would be so much more stressful than sleeping in the car. And we want to create better experiences for families. So one solution might be having a designated sensory zone at or near the shelter that is away from the lights, noise, crowds for people with autism and their families to decompress. And an even better solution would be to have a couple of designated hotels throughout Ventura County that would hold rooms for families that can't access shelters. As far as proactive preparation, one thing that we can all do is outreach and collaboration with local agencies and organizations to share your plans so that families can prepare with you. We're going to talk a little bit about social stories. I'll show you what that looks like a little bit later, and how a social story about emergency plans might help to improve access. We also know that when we have the community involved in the planning process, that makes it significantly more likely that they will attempt to access your services in the case of an emergency. These are sensory kits, or the makeup of sensory kits. We handed out hundreds of sensory kits during the mountain fire, and we hope to be able to secure grant funding to have kits ready for the next disaster. But you can also make your own sensory kits to have on hand. These are some examples: some squishy things, some fidget spinners, noise-canceling headphones, I would say, are number one. Those are a must-have. Weighted blankets are helpful, and sunglasses. So if you can gather up these items and put them in some little bags and just have them ready for families that need them. We were actually surprised at the response from the mountain fire and how many people actively sought out these resources and materials, even just that were evacuated, even if they didn't necessarily lose their home, just staying in a different place, a hotel, or with a friend or family member, and the overwhelm of the fire itself. These tools really help to calm and regulate the population that we serve. The next area that we're going to talk about is cognitive communication and processing challenges. And autistic individuals both high and low support needs, often experience significant communication challenges during emergencies and during times of stress. It's important to note that even fully verbal, highly functioning or lower support needs individuals may actually lose speech and their ability to process during stressful times. That is autism. And many struggle with multitasking or managing steps to gain access to services and support. We see people with significant anxiety, shutdowns, meltdowns, and it's unfortunate when those communication barriers actually become barriers to access. So anytime you have a form that needs to be filled out, that even if it has 10 questions on it, that may be a barrier that prevents a person with a disability, oftentimes an invisible disability, from gaining access to your services without additional help. Non-speaking individuals can also rely on AAC or sign language, a communication partner, or gestures to communicate. You'll see this little picture over here. This is an AAC device. I hope some of you have experienced communication with an AAC device. It's an amazing tool. Those little squares are all buttons, and the tablet actually speaks for the person, effectively giving a person who is nonverbal a voice. And it's a really, really cool tool. And there are ways that you can bring either this technology or the same system, but just on paper, into your organization for emergency preparation or even just overall communication while you're out into the community. These are some examples of social stories. And I wanted to show this because it looks different than your average children's book. The visuals are really important here. And when we talk about communication in general or explaining what's going on with a family in distress when they have a person with autism, these are so helpful. You can find these online. You can also find communication boards specific to your services. I know there's definitely emergency response ones out there, but you can find ones that explain your process. And you can build these through ChatGPT, through AI. There's so many tools out there that will build something custom for you. And even if people are verbal and have autism, these visual stories can really help people to increase their understanding and comfort, because many people with autism are very visual thinkers. So obviously not everyone with autism needs this level of support, but a lot do. And you can never assume that a person does or does not. It's just really great to have that offering. So here is another example. We're going to say this person is a 39-year-old autistic man with a co-occurring intellectual disability. He's 230 pounds. He loves his routines. He has a great life. He goes to a day program during the day and is home in the afternoons with his family. And he's hurt during a disaster and he needs an ambulance. But as the sirens approach, he has a meltdown. The patient appears combative and then is put into restraints. The experience is so bad that the family member who called wonders if they should have called at all. A solution: first responders are aware of the patient's sensory challenges and they know what to do. They turn off their sirens a couple blocks before they approach the house. They understand that only 1 or 2 EMTs should approach the patient, and they are as quiet as possible. They're prepared with sensory kits and a weighted blanket, which they offer the patient as soon as they are stabilized. So those are obviously 2 very different pictures. And I hope that we can work towards this solution. One thing Autism Society of Ventura County did a few years ago was offer sensory kits to every ambulance in Ventura County. So our ambulances do have these sensory kits, and I know that a lot of people that are on the ambulances are aware of how to use those and how they can really create this solution. As far as proactive preparation, one thing that our first responders and all of you can do is bring families and first responders together to build trust. Continued and expanded CIT training for all first responders, including volunteer organizations, is essential. And social stories about emergency response can be readily available and distributed to our community. I do want to touch on our relationship with law enforcement. So in participation, in addition to participation with CIT trainings, on a regular basis, Autism Society Ventura County does a lot of work with local police departments. We have very close relationships with Ventura, Oxnard, and Port Hueneme PD. A special shout out to Oxnard PD, who goes all out, hosting 6 events with us each month, 6 events with us every single April, and raising money through t-shirt sales for us. They wear these awesome autism acceptance patches on their uniforms so that as they're out and about, people can see that they are accepting and that they're learning and that they're having conversations. And they even rep a car for autism acceptance every single year. Beyond the fundraising and beyond the fun that we have, the best part and the most meaningful part of this relationship is the community coming out to these events, interacting with the officers. Families get their questions answered. They talk to the officers about their concerns, and those conversations are two-way and ongoing. And there's nothing better that we can do for our families than ensure that they understand that we are all helpers, despite our scary looking uniform, or despite the sirens on our car, or despite the chaotic environment and a disaster. We are the helpers that are going to help get you through, and we have the tools and the resources that are needed. Autism Society Ventura County is also active in the conversation about the new Blue Envelope program that's rolling out. And this is a program for neurodiversity identification when interacting with law enforcement. So more information to come on that, but some of you may have heard about that. And there are some concerns that we have as Autism Society Ventura County, just ensuring that we're rolling that out in a way that we're not putting anyone in harm's way, and that everyone understands what that blue envelope is really going to mean, which is that they have a disability and need a little bit more support in any kind of information that they're, any kind of situation that they're interacting with law enforcement. Last set of challenges that we're going to review are social and medical challenges. So when we look at a person with autism or anyone with neurodiversity, there is a sense of dependence on a routine and a more difficult than typical time transitioning to a new normal. This is true in day-to-day situations, such as maybe going to a grocery store and finding that the aisles have been switched around and products aren't where you knew that they were. A person with autism may struggle with that, and that can actually cause sensory overload. So now you take a situation where the whole community has changed because there's been a disaster, and you can understand how that might be really, really overwhelming. Autistic individuals can also struggle to understand norms in crisis settings, such as lining up and waiting, and anxiety can cause an increase in repetitive behaviors, which can be perceived as non-compliance. Autistic individuals can and often are misinterpreted as aggressive, defiant, or under the influence, which can put them at significant risk. Once again, the news can be very distressing and negative, and we won't go too deeply into that. In Ventura County, we have an awesome first responder community that is so aware, but this is something that's always in the back of the mind of a parent who has a autistic son who's an adult and who is 230 pounds. What is going to go wrong when they go out into the community, and how understanding is the community going to be? And there are a lot of people with autism that are developmentally much, much younger, but they still look like adults. So being misinterpreted as aggressive can be very dangerous. Autistic individuals also need their caregiver, support team, and familiar routines to regulate. That is part of their sensory diet, is what we like to call it. The support team knows the individual's calming and behavioral strategies, as well as their medical, dietary, and self-care needs. This cannot be understated. Keeping families together is number one, and having a safe space where people with disabilities can go with dignity and bring in their caregivers, their support teams, their families, is really essential to their well-being. Here's another example. This time we have a single mother of a child with autism who is in line to apply for services after their home burned down. The line is an hour long, and she knows that her son will not be able to wait, so she just leaves without applying. One solution might be the agency understands that people with disabilities may have circumstances that prevent them from standing in line. They put a pre-screening volunteer in place to screen for barriers. The volunteer screens this mom and discreetly takes her to someone who can help her promptly. And then our stretch goal, an even better solution. The agency knows that this situation happens all too often, and they have planned for situations just like this. The mother receives a phone call shortly after being displaced, and a volunteer plans to meet her at the hotel where the family is staying to fill out paperwork together. Her son receives respite care in the hotel room, so mom can focus on getting through this essential paperwork. So I hope once again that this paints a picture as to how we can serve better. I also want to touch on some cross-disability considerations. This is something in all of autism studies advocacy that we always make sure to bring other groups, definitely other people with disabilities, into our advocacy. So we also want to plan to include accommodations for mobility impairments, especially we look at ADA compliance, but we can always do even better than ADA compliance. And we really need to have people on our team who can walk through a setting and point out things that may be able to be made more accessible or things that are inaccessible. We need to really learn to screen our spaces. We also have to think of how we can serve our deaf and hard of hearing community with visual alerts and ASL interpreters. When we think about our blind and low vision community, we can think about having tactile signs or orientation assistance. For intellectual disabilities, using plain language and having concrete instructions, using one instruction at a time when there are instructions can be really helpful. And then, of course, I know you all know about the various mental health needs, using trauma-informed responses. And I love how all of these, if you pick any one of these, they're going to support all of the other populations and really the population at large. So we wanted to put this in here, especially because we will be passing on the slides for you all to take back and consider how you can utilize. And then we hear of the places that we fall short through our resource hotline as we're out and about in the community. So I wanted to point these out as well. Transportation options. We need transportation options that are accessible and timely, and they should be part of every single disaster response plan. In-home supports for people with disabilities versus only seniors. This is one during COVID, we had to advocate to have in-home vaccination for people with developmental disabilities versus only seniors. The funding was very limited, and to this day, I'm not really sure if that's something that's being offered or if it's not. It kind of goes in and out with the funding. But this is something that can be really, really helpful, is rather than having people with the disabilities needing to come out to you, actually going out and doing that service in home. We also need to make sure that our staff and your staff and everyone is trained about disability and accessibility. And then, of course, including people living with disabilities in that planning process. So what can you do, specifically, things that you can take back? We talk about being inclusive by design, and this is a term that's used often in education. When you are creating or reworking a plan, it's best practice to keep people with disabilities in mind every stage of the planning process. Whereas when you already have a plan and you try to go back and make amendments to make it accessible, it's really hard to be truly inclusive. So when we are inclusive by design, we're striving to be inclusive in every area of development. And this can be utilized, this principle can be utilized in everything from building a plan to building a process to building a building. It's really across the board. When we look at anything new, we should always start with square one. Are all of the parties at the table, and how do we make sure that every step we are considering them? We talked about quiet rooms and sensory kits. It's a fairly easy thing to do, a fairly inexpensive thing to do that makes a big difference. I do want to drill in once again, including disability status and intake forms with consent, of course, and then including that disability data in your reporting. That's perhaps the best thing that you can do for us in our advocacy. and having ongoing training for staff and volunteers on basic communication strategy and accessibility. We do those trainings, so feel free to reach out to me if you want to set something up for your team. We talked about offering in-home services when possible and needed. Partnerships, I can't emphasize this enough. Partnering with us, partnering with Independent Living Resource Center and Tri-Counties Regional Center for support and to find out what's out there, what the gaps are, and how you can fill them. And we do also have an active advocacy committee. So I invite all of you to check that out and learn more about how we can all work together to make Ventura County the best place to live for people with autism and their families. And that's the end of my presentation today. I know it's a lot. And once again, I so appreciate that you guys are coming. I know there's a couple of questions. If you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to me via email or reach out to us on our website. I would absolutely love to have one-on-ones with those of you who took the time to come today and discuss, what we can do to make all of these ideas a reality. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And I think we can maybe, let's see, I don't know if I'm on the screen, but this is Maria Mello, again, Director of VC VOAD. Thank you so much, Ashley, for this excellent presentation. Definitely, we've already had a few folks reach out and just uplift how important it was to use this space to offer this training and to uplift the work of Autism Society of Ventura County. The idea right now is to go into a few questions from folks. If you can either submit them through the Q&A or through hosts and panelists, we'll be able to do that. In the meantime, the first question that we have was regarding the statistics from CDC around some of the data around if it was 1 in 26 folks, and then also in terms of CDC, this report, how we can access it afterwards.
Yeah. So it was 1 in 36 in 2020, and now it is 1 in 31. And it's 1 in 31 as of data that they pulled from 2022. So there's always a few year lag in their data. But it's 1 in 31 8-year-olds. And the data, I'm sure, is available on the CDC's website. Autism Society of America is actually a great resource as well, just for news and what's going on the national level. We get a lot of our information from the advocacy that they're doing on the national level, and they put out some really great statements. So if you visit autismsociety.org, that will be Autism Society of America, and you can pull a lot of statistics from there. The CDC actually did a really great job of painting a picture with that this is not some drastic increase because of something that's happening in the communities, and that it is due to better screening, better identification. We see the equity gap closing when we look at the autism diagnosis. It used to be primarily white males, white boys that were being diagnosed. And then we've really seen it swing the other direction, where all ethnicities are included in that data. So it's really interesting to see and follow that. But what I can say is there is just so much misinformation out there about the cause of autism, and there's a lot of fear that keeps people from doing things that can keep them safe without being too specific. So we just want to be the bearers of the truth and try to disband some of this false information that's out in our communities, and encourage people to talk to their doctors and to go to a trusted source like your organizations or like Autism Society to get real information.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ashley. Another question is, around the Ventura County Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster Space, which is, a network space of nonprofits and like what we can do, even if we don't have disaster planning, to, serve our clients. within the community. And the question is around, you know, when serving clients, you know, in terms of like staff and trainings, but does it make sense to also, you know, have different materials for, like, you know, if you're serving in different areas like mental health, serving the immigrant community, you know, should this be something that we can also uplift for members that don't necessarily have disaster programs?
Absolutely. Autism is prevalent in every area of our community, and there are obviously individuals with autism who are also immigrants, who are also Spanish speaking, who are, you know, every ethnicity across every class of or every demographic that we are serving. There is autism. And what we find with a lot of families is that they retreat inward. One of our initiatives that I thought was really cool was we went into churches and community organizations that were more like cultural organizations to train on what is autism and how you can react in a positive way during diagnosis, so that the response is not, oh my gosh, an autism diagnosis, let's pray that this gets fixed. It's let's pray that you have the strength. Let's pray that we as parents have the resilience in a religious setting. And so we've done a couple of those trainings, and I just think that that's so cool, because what we want for our community is to be able to interact in the same spaces that they interacted in before the autism diagnosis. We don't want them to feel like, oh, I used to go to this community center, but now that I had a child and fast forward 10 years and they have special needs, we need to go somewhere else instead. We really want to create inclusive spaces. And that does really begin with your team's understanding autism. One thing that I recommend is hiring people who have some understanding, whether it's like a sibling or a person with autism or a parent. Really seek out those people as either volunteers or staff, and they just have the best understanding. So that's some advice that I could give from a business perspective is bring that understanding into your organization in a more organic way. And then the trainings that you do for everyone else will be so much more effective, because there will be someone on your team who's passionate and really understands the ins and outs and has lived in those shoes. So I hope that kind of answers the question. We want to support people being everywhere they want to be, is the bottom line.
That's so powerful. And I think it's something we can definitely do. There's one question from Maggie Tugas, who's an emergency manager with UC Channel Islands, sorry, with University of Channel Islands, and who's also our vice chair. Do you have an EOP, or emergency operations plan, or business continuity plan for your org? And just uplifting, you know, that what you do is very near to their heart and would love to get more involved. So it seems like there's a two question. There's a continuity plan. How can people get more involved? And where can community orgs get CLT training? I'm not familiar with this. Thank you.
So first, I'll just say we have a great relationship with CSUCI. We have Ought to Run on April 27th. That's a Sunday, the last Sunday in every April is held out at CSUCI. In addition to being a huge 5K, 10K, 15K fun run, it's also a giant resource fair. It's actually the largest autism resource fair in Southern California. We pull out 100 vendor booths, and it's just so much fun to bring everyone together. And it's just a huge party. There's like 4,000 people out there. So definitely come out and check it out. And so I want to give that shout out to CSUCI first. The second thing I'll say around the emergency plan, we don't really have one. So although Autism Society Ventura County has been around for 30 years, we just brought on our first staff member like 7 years ago. And as I mentioned, we're a team of 5. So our like standard operating procedures we have down in terms of having a full-blown like community emergency response plan. We don't have anything necessarily in writing one thing that's nice about being small is that we're able to just react in ways that we need to in those types of situations. One example that I love is during the mountain fire, when we were dropping off a sensory kit to a family who had lost their home, and the mom was distraught. And she was just like, my son, he had like this VHS collection of Disney movies and all these movies, and he had a list of them and he collected them. And it was like his special interest, and now they're just gone. And we were like, oh, we can help. So we reached out to our board members and went to some thrift stores and like collected all these movies and went and dropped them off. And it's like, to them, that was number one. That was more than anything else that they needed. They needed that so that their son could be okay. And so that's how we respond to emergencies now, is more like, what is the need? Where can we fill the gap, whether it's for one family or for the entire community? So the mountain fire, like I said, our best example is we did sensory kits and we did this movie thing for this one family, and that was the best that we could do at that time. We're a very small organization with probably an operating budget that's like, I don't know, 5% of some of your operating budgets. So we're tiny, tiny, but we do what we can.
Thanks, Ashley. And just so you all know, Ventura VC VOAD will be creating a cohort for nonprofits to work with a specialist to create a continuity of business plans if they want to. But I think you all are already doing incredible, incredible work. And all of the information you've provided today is so, so useful. And I just want to announce that we'll be sharing this presentation with everyone that attended, with the video, with the actual webinar video. I believe with the deck, we'll be sharing that deck, Ashley, I believe. And I do really want to invite you all to contact Ashley afterwards if you have any more pressing questions, and also to support their work. So definitely, Autism Society of Ventura County makes our disaster preparedness work much stronger. So here's an invitation for all of us to support Ashley and the team behind this, and also join the advocacy. Is it called the advocacy team? The advocacy committee?
Yes, our advocacy committee. We review school board, city council, county supervisor, and other agendas and give public comment. So that's kind of at a snapshot, but we have full-blown policy guidelines, and it's a really, really great committee. We've been able to make some really cool things happen. So we're excited to continue with that work.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So with it being 10:57 and we're kind of wrapping up, lots of thank yous from everyone as well. And just wanted to also close by announcing that our webinar series will continue through the spring and through the summer, with our next one really around disaster preparedness and caregivers serving older adults, the disability community, and we know how important that is. So more to come. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so, so much for coming on.
Thanks, Ashley. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, and thank you, Clara. Thank you so much, Clara, for interpretation. Yes. Have a wonderful day. We hope you all stay connected.
Very much for the opportunity. Bye-bye.